Hello, everyone. My name is Yvonne Carlson, and I am the chair of the Digital Media Committee for NRB. Thank you for coming to our session, Risk Assessment in the Age of Deplatforming. So just to get a sense of the room, who here is representing technology in their organization? Very good. Love seeing those fellow technologists. How about legal? Do we have anybody from the legal and policy perspective? Great.
Good.
Anybody representing the content creators here? Okay. No, this is really helpful because I have some great panelists here. I'm going to go ahead and have them introduce themselves and give the name of their organizations. But when we put this panel together, we were thoughtful in terms of having people from different domains of expertise. So they're going to share that with you now.
Okay, my turn to share. So thank you, Yvonne, for leading this panel today. She's been a great taskmaster. Actually got us together and said, you will say this, and here's what you say. Anyway, she's great at that, so I encourage you to talk to Yvonne at all times. So I'm association with NRB is really through Lion's Den. It's a ministry, but for-profit companies come together with funders. And so it's a little bit like Christian Shark Tank. And so it's had just a great run of growth out of Dallas, Texas, and Birmingham, Alabama. And we've funded a number of different companies. And we see our companies, as they come through Lion's Den, grappling with this. And so we deal a little bit with the lower size companies, so to speak. So small companies and big companies have this problem in common. I've also in a telephone consultancy business, and we face data center issues in every transaction we do. So we see the need to protect data, to protect how the data is distributed. And so it's a great panel, and appreciate all of you being here today.
And I also have to add that Ed is also an attorney, so he's going to be talking about the legal aspect of this topic.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that. It's kind of like if you say that, people just,
I think that gives credibility.
Oh.
Good morning. This is Ross Stonecipher. I'm with Samaritan's Pearce in information technology as a senior director. And Samaritan's Pearce is a humanitarian disaster relief firm and also works on a global basis. And so we have experienced a number of issues of deplatforming in our own right in the past, have been proactive in the way that we're looking to prohibit that going forward, and we'll share a little bit more about that today.
Good morning, Nathan Berkeley with the Religious Freedom Institute. I'm our communications director and research coordinator. We're based in Washington, D.C. We work in the United States and in several regions around the world, not surprisingly advancing religious freedom. We advance religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, not because all faith traditions are equal in truth, but because all people are equal in dignity, and we really believe that. And I'm excited to be here. Yvonne has actually contributed to and kind of partnered with us in the past in a variety of ways with our Middle East work, and I'm excited for this discussion.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us today. So we're in an inflection point with the use of technology in our society. It drives everything that we do. So this conversation applies to all of us, because all of us use technology. So just to frame the conversation, I want to first talk about some cases that we're seeing in the news. Every week I'm seeing some sort of headline where a ministry has been deplatformed for some reason. An example that comes to mind is Alliance Defending Freedom was deplatformed by Salesforce. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. And I'd like to hear from you, gentlemen, what cases or stories are really front and center in your mind right now?
Well, one other instance that immediately comes to mind, mostly because of its severity, and this happened to LifeSite News, I think it was 18 months ago or so, in which their YouTube channel was completely shut down with no notice whatsoever, no recourse, no opportunity for remedy or kind of inquiring as to the reason for it being shut down. Now, had all of their video assets been maintained only in that space, they would have lost thousands and thousands of hours of content. So it's the rapidity with which it was, leveled against them, and they had no ability to kind of inquire further into why it happened. And so that's one in which my mind immediately goes because of how fast it occurred, and they couldn't have planned for it except for they planned before the crisis came.
And I think last evening you heard Franklin share about deplatforming from a bank. So he had shared where the bank had actually deplatformed Samaritan's Purse. So he took aggressive steps after that and have been planning for it since then.
Yeah, so I think I'm a little bit more on the small company bandwidth, and so really appreciate Dr. Graham kind of pushing forward with his initiative. Those are sea change ideas. That's what we need, because the other side is out of control, and we've got to fight back in this control. And frankly, we see a lot of small companies. Don't think that you're not the size of Samaritan's Purse, you're not going to have a problem. So we see small companies almost weekly come in and say, hey, Ed, I just got my whole platform shut down. I was trying to do something good. I was trying to lead a campaign for hunger. I talked about the gospel, and they just put me on hold. And you can't get off a hold with a phone call. You've got to really work through it and fight through it. And so this is a problem that we all face now.
And we didn't mention some of the donation processing cases that have been out there, right? So a lot of us are nonprofits, right? We're donor supported. So there are definitely cases where people are no longer able to transact. So not just their bank, but the platform that supports or drives their donation engine has also been impacted. I'm curious, in terms of communication, marketing and promotion, what you gentlemen have seen in terms of cases. I know, Ed, we were talking about this morning.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to, we think about deplatforming as maybe either too specific and narrow or almost like a ubiquitous problem. I don't know where the solution is. So this is not only your data, so you have a data center or a server farm, and so when you get big enough, you go to a data center and you have that environment. Samaritan's Purse has a huge, tier 3 hardened data center environment, which is fantastic, state of the art. We see it in small companies. We also see it, though, as you express what the ministry does. And so I think about deplatforming as this restriction, the restriction of both the way you reach out and the way you need to protect your data. That's the sort of my view of that.
And Nathan, you're responsible for communications at your organization. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so one thing that we've seen at RFI are more subtle forms of denial. For instance, we've had 2 Facebook ads that we attempted to boost. They were denied based on sort of a vague reading of community standards. These were messages that were stating principles of medical conscience rights as we're trying to advance legislation in a number of states to protect doctors, nurses, pharmacists, but also faith-based hospitals that want to refrain from offering certain services on their premises. And these statements of principle, I think they're impactful, but how they could be perceived to be a violation of some standard or policy at Meta is kind of beyond my comprehension. Now, we did request a re-review, I guess, or a review of both. One was reversed, the other was not, and it's inexplicable as to why. So these are the kinds of things that even when you don't lose kind of an entire service or a vendor's partnership, where you can be impeded in some important matters of communicating with your constituency and beyond.
Yeah, I just would say that I think we're all at risk because we don't really all read those end-user license agreements very well, do we? Have you gotten through all of yours that your business or your organization is reliant upon? So making sure we know exactly where we're exposed isn't something that readily comes to mind.
Yeah, so, really what we're doing here is we're painting a picture of your reliance on technology, right? And the different spaces and places where you need to be thinking about technology as an organization. And it's just as much about policy and procedure as it is about which vendors you choose. So even doing a vendor audit, making sure you know where your data lives. Is it portable? Can you take your data and move it to a new location should you need? These are things that we definitely, all of us, need to have some planning around. I'm interested in, Ross, your thoughts around this, especially as you lead technology in an organization. What are some of the things that you're thinking about at Samaritan's Purse?
So certainly it's data portability, making sure we have a copy of anything that is pertinent to the operation of the organization. It's key. Not only that, the policies and procedures about how our individual employees and volunteers are interacting with our systems. Really specifically having a very strong phishing, smishing, phishing exploitation policy. And not only that, but tracking it, testing against it, and making sure that everybody is trained and educated on exactly what they may see in a phishing program. It's key. Making sure that we cut off access to people in our system that have failed or that aren't trained up on it is a key area as well. So you've got to protect not only from the inside, but you also have to protect from the outside and make sure you have backups available for everything. And that means websites. How many of you in the audience use a WordPress site? WordPress is very easily hacked in many ways. So having a copy of your website every night backed up somewhere in a data center that's not on site or somewhere that's outside is key. If they take you out, you can just spin it up and start it the next morning.
And Ross, let me just emphasize one thing that you mentioned. You alluded to training. Policies that don't find their way into kind of rigorously imparting that to your staff can leave you vulnerable because policy is dead letter if it's not implemented. So I'm sure you all are doing that with great gusto.
So really, it's not just about the internal threats, it's also the external threats. Oftentimes what I've found is that people will do a really good threat analysis on the external side, but not on the internal side. So that piece around policy, procedure, training, very, very important. Data governance, what we're talking about, having a snapshot of your data, making sure that data is portable, and then thinking about any security implications. So Ross brought up, you can be hacked. It will happen. I've been in organizations, providing pro bono legal services to human rights victims, and our website was hacked. So one of the things you might be saying to yourself is, this is not my expertise. This is not my domain. So if it's not, then I would link arms with somebody who does know about this. So it's not just about having an advisor, but maybe a group of trusted advisors. So I'd be interested to hear from the panel, what kind of advisement or what type of people would you include in your circle, to make sure that you're thinking about things from different perspectives and asking the right questions?
Well, I think you have to have somebody that's operational, that knows the way your organization is operating and understands the workflows, understands where the data is and what's being used to make decisions and communicate. Secondarily, you need a technologist, somebody that's familiar with your technology and where it's going and how it's being used. You also need somebody that understands the users in your organization so that you can segment your security policies on what people can see inside of the ministry, what they need to see, and only what they need to see. Because anytime you have extra information available, then you never know where it might be misused instead of used properly.
So that's really great advice, and I think you guys do that really, really well. So learn to think of it as not just one resident in one position in your organization. So from the technology side, you may have a CTO or someone that you can reach out and work with on that, but this is not purely a technology problem. This is really more of a governance and board level problem. So we recommend that you actually have either formally or informally, like a chief information officer or a chief security officer that you can go to, and you may have a company of 5 people, but just know where you want to plug in that resource, because it's not just the CTO. The CTO, she will have 10 different things. Due respect to Yvonne, she has 15 things that are fighting for her time and budget, and so she is really under pressure to make sure things happen. And so it has to start at the top of the organization, be carried through all through the organization, and you have to have both of these left brain, right brain covered, or else you're going to find yourself disconsolate when someone attacks your system.
So think about this. We applauded and praised God last night when we mentioned the Dobbs case, right? The law on abortion was overturned. So that was a great victory. Lots of prayer went into that. But that really speaks to the fact that public perception is a liability. So when your organization speaks out for life, for sexual orientation, for the definition of marriage and family, that puts you at risk. So the Napa Legal Institute, if you're not familiar with them, I would ask you to follow them. The Napa Legal Institute did a study, and they found that tech companies deplatformed 28 faith-based organizations or religious leaders between October 2020 and October 2022. And the reason why is nearly half of those messages involved sexual orientation, right, and standing for a biblical stance. So we were talking about this at breakfast. You know, how do we frame our conversations along these topics? So I'd like to hear from the panel, you know, your thoughts around, you know, as we think about public perception. We obviously want to stand for the truth, but, you know, what should we be thinking about in terms of our visibility?
Sure, I can start here. One thing that we want you all to think about is the nexus between your technology partners and how publicly visible you are in the areas of life related to abortion and other issues, human sexuality, transgender-related issues, because these are the things that end up getting ministries ensnared. And then to do an inventory of your technology needs, your external partners, and to look, as my colleague said, at their user agreements. RFI did look at a number of our partners' user agreements, and the reality is many of them, at least two, had non-discrimination rules around sexual orientation and gender identity that I think, if improperly interpreted and distorted, but I think it's likely that they would be interpreted in an adversarial way, would get us in trouble for the kind of religious freedom advocacy that we do. So it's not that we're discouraging transparency. If your ministry does take a public stand on these things and articulate a clear message about what Christians have always believed in these matters, we don't discourage that at all. But if you do, we're encouraging you to recognize that there's an increased risk as a result of it. And it may be that you have more work to do in finding backup options in case one of these vendors ends up shutting you down as a result of, for example, a non-discrimination policy that, if so interpreted, the very expression of a biblical view of these things could get you into trouble with them.
Nathan, I think that's a great point, and what you've just described is a risk profile. Every single one of our organizations has a risk profile. How many of you have life insurance and or home insurance on your home property? Anybody? So the point is, many of us as organizations don't have the same fallback in insurance for our organizations and how we work. So identify the risks you have in your organization, identify what you can do about them, put those in place. That's something we've been working on and starting to narrow down the approaches on. And I'm happy to share with any of you kind of the process we're going through. But identify those things, make actionable steps against them so that you have not only plan A, but plan B and plan C on what happens when it happens instead of waiting for it to happen.
I think those are both really great points. So Yvonne's question kind of encapsulates, we're not telling you to just bow down to everything that is happening in the world today. We stand firm as Christians. We stand firm before God. We're going to continue our faith-driven. But the Bible also tells us to do that with wisdom. And so what you have here are some really safe harbor and really great pieces of legislation originally intended to do good, like the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which essentially is being used today to say if something as an internet provider is against what I think are commonly held good beliefs, I'll just use that language, it's in some of the byproduct, then I can shut you down. And so there's this huge safe harbor. We're not going to change that overnight. So you have to be wise on how you present your gospel message, because if it gets flagged and you get shut down, you don't turn it on in an hour. I mean, it's really a problem. And so this safe harbor has been used to allow a lot of different companies, big companies, without legislative control to do what they're doing now. This is a problem.
And so for this audience, has anybody in this audience, I'm just curious, experienced deplatforming? Okay, several of you. Well, the people that raise their hands, you might want to talk to them, because there's a difference between thinking about it and going through it. It's really helpful to have somebody, I'm all over phone a friend that I can call. You've been through this. What steps did you take? How did you approach this? Who from your organization did you involve? And then back to a point that was already made, are you talking about this on an organizational leadership level? Is this something that your CEO or whoever is leading your organization is following and tracking? And if not, then how can you help that person by bringing them, good information? You're getting good information here. Go back to your organizations and share it. So we've been talking about the problem, right? So the problem space is pretty big. There are different ways in which our organizations could be deplatformed. I'd like to turn a page and really talk more about solutions. We have talked a little bit about solutions, but I want to really narrow in on that now. So, gentlemen, if there was one thing that you would recommend our audience do, like one measure that they could take immediately, what is it that you would recommend?
Well, let me begin, because I think my colleagues will have much more to say on this than I do. And I mean that, and I look forward to learning from them in the next few moments. But think about simple steps. There are elaborate measures that probably everyone here or their organization should take. But think about also some very basic steps that could be executed immediately that would give you more protection. I'll just give one example. As I did research for this panel, and I started to look at some of our technology providers more in depth, I found that our mass email service has a policy that if they took note of us in a particular way, it could be enforced against us, and I think that's definitely true. Now, this service is also a place where we house all of our major donor information, our policy contacts in state houses across the country, as well as in DC, and other people who are very interested in what we do, our constituency, that it's vital for us to continue to have contact with them. As of a few months ago, we just started to just back up all of that information on a bi-weekly basis to make sure as we add scores or hundreds of new contacts into this list, we also have a space where we're just backing it up, and we have that accessible to us at any time should they take it away. So these are the kinds of things that are entirely inadequate but also essential for you to do. Take these basic steps.
And I guess I would just add is that you need to really back up as frequently as you can afford to. And I would say that should be nightly instead of biweekly, because you can't afford to miss a day's work. Can't afford to miss a day's worth of information. It's important to have.
Yep. So let's play defense and offense. And so from the defensive standpoint, from your CTO standpoint, is the critical person in this loop. He or she has to essentially do what was just said. You have to create a backup plan. You just have to. It has to be secondary recovery, should even be tertiary recovery, but there's really inexpensive advice that you can get along these lines, and you have to have the data backed up, no question about it. You also have to, on the other side of the fence, look at essentially like a communications plan. And you have to say, what if something happens here? I need to plan for these things happening. You need to really diversify your contractor base, Nathan said. You need to have more than one person that's doing. Now that's really kind of hard, because some of these, not to name names, but this is a worldwide comprehensive technology solution. But you've got to know if they shut you down, you've got to be able to get up and running within a matter of hours with someone else. So you've got to find a couple different ways to do that. And then if you have this plan going forward, you actually, I think, do what the Lord says. You're building your house out of stone and brick, and you really have to take that idea that this will happen to me. I need to be ready for it. And that's exactly what Franklin Graham said last night.
Amazon, Apple, AT&T, Google, and Verizon. Those are examples of organizations who have really leaned into activists. Some of these special interest groups, these activist groups, they keep lists. They keep lists in terms of who supports their cause and who does not support their cause, and they target them. So chances are some of us in this room are on a list. Well, what then shall we do? I mean, we have the best hope there is in Jesus Christ. So, all is not lost. This is where proper planning needs to come into place. So, as my colleague said, having a backup system, having a backup plan is important, especially for those organizations who are really stepping out on key issues. So when you're going to do a major campaign, when you're going to do a major push or series, you might want to check in and say, okay, we know we're talking on a controversial topic, and there could be backlash, there could be response. Are we in a good place to handle anything that comes our way? And you know what? The most important weapon we have is the power of prayer. I have literally seen people pray over technology systems, software, and amazing things happen. Or actually, what I've seen more is inspiration. Like, you know what? I know how to fix that problem. I know how to fix that problem. So in that case, who's your SWAT team? Who are those people that you call in if something does happen? We call that in the security world an incident response team. Who's part of your incident response team within your organization that can quickly pivot and employ or deploy plan B or C? I'm curious for this panel to explain how you're viewing what's going on in the technology space with AI. We're seeing a lot of shift. Do you think that it's going to be more important than ever to have a plan? Do you think that's going to change the game at all?
Well, we talked about that earlier, and your panel has a little bit of a different view between each of us, but that's okay. So because we don't really know, if you look at what AI is, it's a little bit like when I was in heavy corporate world, someone would say, well, what is marketing? Well, marketing kind of goes to what your company defines marketing as, right? And so AI is all across the map. It has potential for good, a lot of potential for evil. And so that's really the question. So a lot of that is being understood. But if anything, used for the total positive, AI might be able to help you sort of craft your message a little bit different way, but be aware of the pitfalls of AI, because it can also take you another different way. Even the well-known kind of AI platforms that are out there, they really usually will have a designated search database that they're deriving information from. When they're doing a speech from Yvonne, they're going and searching, somewhere, and that's going to be tainted with their own self-perception, their own view of the world. And so that will continue to be maybe done better, maybe not done better, but AI is really, it's a tool for good and evil right now, I think. I would say that.
And this is where we differ a little bit, because I assume that it could be used for evil. So I would basically say, let's not feed it, and let's make sure that if you're going to use it, you're very suspicious of how it's being used, with where you're inputting it and how they're tracing information that's coming in from your organization.
And Yvonne, if I could add one more thing.
Please.
He's kind of in the middle ground.
To try to walk a very narrow path between them is simply this. Do not allow first, consult the best Christian counsel on AI. Think about the ethical implications and edges of it, and don't allow your adoption of it to get ahead of your rigorous reflection on how God might, kind of call us to respond to it. So understand what it is, understand the implications around it, think deeply and ethically about it first, and then move forward if you think it's judicious and appropriate for your ministry.
And so really how AI connects to this conversation is AI uses data. So every time you're using a tool, you're feeding it. And the question is, should you be feeding it? And where is that data being saved and or housed? I am the first to use an AI-based tool. I use them all day long. I use them for code refactoring. I use them for analysis of data. But the thing is that, again, back to the terms and conditions, where is that data going? So as you think about your policies and your procedures around data, You know, it's not just your donation systems, right? Your website. It's any tool that you use that would share your data with the outside world. You know, be thinking about that and planning for that as you craft and document those policies.
Yep. A quick follow-up. So I've noticed in AI, so we'll use AI to kind of modulate the message, and I use that term carefully. But the more specific and narrow question you have of an AI platform that deals specifically with a religious issue, let's just say, you know, if you put in supralapsarianism or something like that, the response is going to be more narrow because they're dealing with a pool of information that may not have that much information in that. And so because they're rooted a lot of times in the more left median of the world, they're going to come back with a lot of different things and give you different pictures. It'll be sometimes weaker in what I would say are the traditional Christian values. Just my opinion.
Thank you. No, that was great. I really appreciate that. I mean, I couldn't have this panel without bringing up AI. I think that everybody's thinking about it, and you know, since we're talking about policy, I hope that, again, not just deplatforming, talk about, you know, at a leadership level how AI is used in your organization. I want to backtrack a little bit, and I want to sort of look into the future. We talked a little bit about what's been happening, where we're at. Where are we going with all this? What is the biggest threat that you're seeing that we need to be answering to and we're thinking about?
Okay, so that's a tough one. I think the threat is, or the fact is this is going to get worse before it gets better. There's really no legislative control over what these major companies are doing. And so they're looking, much like Franklin Graham talked about last night in the banking example, where a mid-level executive made an opinion to cut off an account. Beautiful example. In this context, these companies are so big that senior management is not touching on the individual decision to shut somebody down. And the guideline is really a cultural guideline of the individual that tends to be farther left or farther radical than we would like, and really not protecting individual religious liberties. So I think we're in for a period until Congress can kind of get its arms around it. Think of the robber baron era at the 1900s, when John D. Rockefeller, whose foundation is doing a tremendous amount of good today, basically controlled the pricing of petroleum products in all the world. And his wealth was essentially $3 trillion. He controlled everything. And so not until Congress came in and started breaking that up, and we don't want over government control, we're certainly not saying that, but there's no governance, there's no parameter around these companies doing what they think in their own mind is the right thing. That's the problem.
And from our perspective, we think it really boils down to controlling all of your operational processes, controlling all of your data, and making sure that it's in a safe and secure place. And as you heard Franklin speak about last night, we've built a Tier 3 data center in the Denver area to be a ministry that can serve other ministries in doing that. So Bill Maupin's actually in the audience, so if you heard that last night, you can corner him and talk to him about that today. But we really, really, really believe that that's probably the easiest way, is get control of your operational control, your servers, your controllers, and your data. Make sure you have it in a place that you can always get to it so you can maintain operations.
And I'll look at this from a little bit different perspective. Big tech companies are responding to cultural forces around human sexuality that we just can't ignore. And the reality is those forces, kind of promulgated by cultural elites, make Christian teachings in certain areas unintelligible in some respects and entirely condemnable in others. And that is something that is going to kind of alienate Christian organizations increasingly, I think, for the foreseeable future. President of Focus on the Family, Jim Daly, and Archbishop Cordileone of San Francisco co-authored an op-ed that I think captures this really well. Today's sexual politics, they write, function as a new kind of fundamentalism, one that presents a deep problem to a diverse and democratic society. Instead of encouraging the dialogue of democratic process, the fundamentalists of this emerging sexual politics seek to impose their own rigid certitude unilaterally on matters ranging from foster care and adoption to gender ideology in the family, this new fundamentalism is displacing the moral convictions that once grounded U.S. culture. As big tech embraces this more and more over time, and I think it is a reality that at least for the foreseeable future that will be the case, it is going to place Christian organizations in a very difficult spot, a spot of needing to endure and a spot of needing to be more resilient, including in their technology appropriation.
I think this is where this community, NRB community, comes in. We need each other, right? Each of us has various gifts and abilities, and again, if you don't have people like my colleagues in your organizations, that's fine. You know someone. Start building those advisory teams. And I just welcome you to join the conversation. So we will be here and available to you after this panel, but I want you to leave this place thinking about, who can I talk to about this topic? How can I learn more about this topic? And there's this really good thing called Google Alerts. I don't know if you've ever used it. And so what I've done is I have flagged the word deplatforming on my Google Alerts. So I'm seeing the different deplatforming cases coming through. And note that it's not just Christian organizations. It's happening in Jewish organizations, other faith traditions as well. And so this isn't going away. And as we alluded, legislation is not keeping up with the problem. So that means we've got to get ahead of it as best we possibly can. And there's force in numbers. And if you join the conversation, you will help bring about the right solutions. So as we're wrapping up our panel, gentlemen, what would you give as your last piece of sage advice to our audience?
I can begin. Move this idea of technology resiliency into the category of stewardship for your organization. This is a way for us to safeguard the resources God has given us. I think that is kind of strategically and in principle the best thing that you can do, because it is time for that, and the threat is significant enough to regard it in that way.
I would just restate Franklin's words last night. The storm is coming. It's getting here quickly, and you need to be ready.
Yeah, what a great message. Thanks for giving him all those points last night. Okay. He's very receptive to all those points. But what a great message. I think the idea is if you're a CTO, you know what to do. You have to protect the technology, the data. If you're a marketing person, you have to think about your message in a way that's just realistic, how someone is reading your message from what I would call the other side, so to speak. And if you're in a management role or you're at a head of an organization, you got to do something. Don't do everything, but do something. You got to get going on it.
So as we wrap up our panel, I'd like to pray for all of you in the audience in this regard. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, I do thank you and praise you for those that joined this conversation today. Lord, I ask for your divine wisdom and your vision for how we can protect our own organizations so we can continue to spread the gospel far and wide. Lord God, would you bring along the right resources, whether those be human resources or fiscal resources, Lord. I pray for your hand of provision. And Lord, most of all, I pray for your inspiration. Lord God, you know the problems, and you are a God of answers. So thank you that we can come to you in any time with any need, including this need, Lord God, to make sure that we can do what we do best, and that's to share the gospel of Jesus. We thank you, we praise you, we give you glory. Amen. Thanks, everyone.